Hello, and welcome to the last episode of Season 1 of the Sarahcast, Conversations in Social Emotional Learning. I cannot believe we are almost halfway through the school year and that we're at the very end of our first season of our very first podcast. When the pandemic hit, our routines, our homes, our sense of normalcy was completely turned upside down. And these conversations with friends and mentors, researchers and scientists in the field of social emotional learning suddenly seemed critical to share with educators across the country who were scrambling for solutions in social emotional learning and figuring out how to make remote learning work. We knew that school leaders were looking for ways to build adult capacity for social emotional learning. From my closet at home or alone in my office, which is entirely glass and we've now learned is also awful for sound, I've spoken with leading researchers and scientists who have been driving this work for decades, as well as educators who bring it to life in the classroom or remotely every single day. As I reflect on this season and the conversations we've had, I cannot believe how much has changed in the field of social emotional learning and for education at large. The end of the year and the halfway point in the school year is a great opportunity for reflection. So I've invited school leaders from the Move This World community for a roundtable discussion to share their experiences and their perspectives from the first half of the school year. Join us to reflect on what you've seen, what you've learned, and what you've accomplished in your work as well. And in a big improvement from that USB mic in a closet in my bedroom or in my all-glass office with awful sound, here we are in Brooklyn in an actual studio. Doesn't it sound amazing? Can you hear the difference? I'm excited to bring in some inspiring school leaders who I cannot wait for you to hear from. Kevin Bowles, Dr. Melinda Johnson, and Jessica Drzewucki. I am excited to share a conversation with three really inspiring school leaders today. One who is physically with me in our studio in Brooklyn, Kevin Bowles, who we've actually had the honor of working with his school, New Bridges Elementary, since he founded the school 8 years ago. Jessica Drzewucki, also in Brooklyn, and Dr. Melinda Johnson in Maryland. So before we dive into this discussion, could you each share very briefly who you are, either some inspiring moment or person that brought you into education to begin with, and the school that you are leading? So Kevin, would you be able to kick us off since you're, unfortunately for you, right next to me?
Sure, the hot seat.
Exactly, the hot seat.
Yes, so my name is Kevin Bowles. I am the principal of New Bridges Elementary in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and I have been the principal there for the last 8 years since I was lucky enough to be chosen to start a school, to replace a school that was being closed down. And I think a pivotal moment for me in my development as an educator was that I was a teacher at a school in Far Rockaway in Queens during the time that Hurricane Sandy happened. And I really, through that experience of actually having to relocate our students to a different school building, and because I lived in the community, being the one who was responsible for supervising children getting on the buses every morning from their homes which were without power and without running water during that time. And I was able to really see and be a part of the way that a community could support kids and their families in a moment of crisis. And that was really what solidified for me this calling to start my own school that could be that place for another community. And now, yet again, we're called back into really a moment where school is the hub for so many people. And so I feel very proud and very fortunate to do my best to be able to provide that sense of comfort and safety to kids and teachers and families at a time where so much is unsure and unsafe.
Thank you, Kevin. Dr. Johnson, would you share with us next?
Sure. Melinda Johnson. I am the principal of J.P. Ryan Elementary School in Waldorf, Maryland, Charles County, and this is my second year in Maryland as a principal. Prior to that, I served as a principal in Plainfield in Newark, New Jersey. Taught there for a number of years. My career originated in Baltimore City as a teacher, and my passion is a funny story. Growing up, I would always say that I'm going to be a professional dancer because I took dance class, and that I would shop at Bloomingdale's, and that I would teach also. And so I pursued that dream I had a high school job at Chuck E. Cheese, and I was like, wait a second, I really do enjoy working with children, the sounds they make, the noises. I enjoyed the moment that I walked in the door. You know, Chuck E. Cheese is a very loud place. Hosting the birthday party, I enjoyed everything about that. And so it further was solidified when I took a general ed course my freshman year in elementary adolescent studies, and I had a field experience. And I just really enjoyed seeing the light bulb go off. And my first year I taught in Baltimore City, I had about 32 students in my class. First year teacher, I thought I was going to change the world. And I really did try to change the world. I had several experiences, but I didn't give up. First year you either make it or you're going to break it. So I made it past that December survival stage, and I came back and I just continue, and I just really, really enjoy children. And that is what I'm very passionate about each and every day. And so now that we are in COVID, I can't see and touch and feel children. And so it's very difficult not to be able to have that physical connection with your scholars. Face-to-face connection is everything. So I'm very happy to be on this podcast this evening.
Thank you. Jessica?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm the principal of PS 128 in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. This is my 8th year as principal of PS 128. Thinking about that question, I can't really pin down a moment, but I think one of the things that has been inspirational to me as an educator is that I've worked in several different schools within New York City. I worked in the Bronx, I've worked in Manhattan, I've worked in a couple schools in Brooklyn. And seeing the diversity and the difference in the communities, and recognizing that serving those communities looks really, really different, even within the New York City public school system. It keeps me engaged and inspired every day, because as the situation changes, like we've seen this year, and as the communities change, as people move in and people move out, the needs of the community change. So I think that's one thing that keeps me inspired, is figuring out exactly what my community needs right now and trying to bring that to them.
Great. So before we dig deeper into this discussion, it wouldn't be the Sarahcast or anything Move This World if we didn't take an opportunity to center ourselves and ground ourselves before we go deeper. So let's take a moment, and if you're comfortable, close your eyes. If you're not comfortable closing your eyes, you can just go ahead and stare at the ground beneath you. And let's think of one feeling that we want to let go of right now. One feeling, one person, one idea, one project, one distraction that is not serving us in this moment, that is not allowing us to have a productive present discussion. And what that release from our heads and hearts and bodies might sound like. And when I say go, you can keep your eyes closed so you don't feel awkward or uncomfortable. We are all four of us are going to make the sound of the feeling that we are releasing that is no longer serving us. Okay? When I say go. 1, 2, 3, go. Nice. Now, let's think of one feeling that we want to take with us at the end of this discussion, at the end of this roundtable conversation, and what that feeling that we take with us might sound like. And when I say go, let's all make the sound, all four of us, of the feeling that we are going to carry with us into this discussion and beyond. 1, 2, 3, go. Amazing. Thank you. You can open your eyes. I really appreciate you just diving in there. So let's go back to that week in March when school started closing, either in Brooklyn or Maryland. I'm sure that, or wherever you are. Let's just take ourselves back to that moment where we were, what we were feeling, what we were thinking. What was that time like? What was going on for you? And what were you dealing with as a leader of a community? And anyone who's inspired can jump in.
I think for me, there was a little bit of disbelief happening at that time because, every year we think we're closing for a snow day, we think we're closing for a snow day, and we don't. So when there was all this talk about the school system closing down, I thought this can't possibly happen. And I personally had just been on an amazing vacation to Key West a couple weeks before. And, I was feeling that kind of like midwinter, like revival or rejuvenation, and spring was coming. And, I just couldn't believe that we were about to go into this really dark time. And, people kept saying to me, this is what we're going to do if we close. My son has a piano class, and she said, if the school's closed, I'm going to go to Zoom. And I said to her, they're not going to close the schools. That can't possibly happen. And my boss was saying to me, prepare for closing. And I think I was just holding on to this disbelief that it was really going to happen for a lot longer probably than I should have been. That's the overwhelming memory I have.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree. I would say separation anxiety, like knowing that you were going to get ready to separate and not be able to make sure you would greet my students every day, thinking that, well, we're going to close, but we're going to be back. This is just going to be short. This is just temporary, and we're waiting for this to be over, but we're going to be back. So they kept telling us that we're back in the building, we're back. So it was just separation anxiety. We made the decision to close, and on that last day, I think our attendance was very low. And I'm like, I didn't get a chance to do this. I didn't get a chance to do that. It's grief. It's when you lose someone. Did you get a chance to say the last things you needed to say? Did you collect that last bit of information? Did you give them what they needed to be successful? So it was just separation anxiety, and then fear of not being able to give them everything they needed to be successful before we left the building. And we had a number of field trips planned right into DC. And I had to make the decision to cancel a very large trip, and they were very upset. And I said, no one told me to make that decision, but I just had a gut feeling that I cannot send 5 busloads of students and parents into Washington, D.C., where I see the numbers rising. We didn't have a sure decision yet for our county, but I knew I just couldn't do that. And I had disappointment from teachers, from students, from parents, because they were numbers of chaperones that we had planned. So it was just a lot of things, but I knew that next day that I had made the best decision. But I definitely will say the separation anxiety. And I would agree with Jessica, just disbelief, just not knowing that we can't close. Like we got to come back soon. This is a nightmare that's going to be over very soon. So still feeling that way, by the way. Still feeling that way.
I am definitely having a reaction to both of your shares, just the words grief and disbelief. And I just remember now looking at it, having heard you reflect on that I just didn't allow myself to feel any of those things in the moment, which maybe isn't the healthiest approach, but we just went to action. Like, what can we do right now? And in a way that sounds like it was a little different than what happened in Maryland. We were given these 3 days with staff in the building. Jessica, I'm sure you remember kind of like the speed and urgency of those days, just trying to figure out, like you were saying, Melinda, everything that we could possibly do to set kids and teachers up for success once they left the building, because we didn't know what the future could hold. And so that kind of like safe place of action and decisions and preparation. But there is underneath all of that really an enormous amount of grief and currently in this moment, disbelief that we're still having this conversation so many months later without having been able to have our school communities back together in the way fully that they are that they are meant to be.
It's interesting that you talk about just going right into action and not providing space for processing. And I think that's so common for leaders, there's a saying that early when I was building Move This World, someone said to me that I hold on to daily. That's just like, it's really lonely at the top. There's not, who do you call on for support when you feel scared or isolated or confused? And I'm wondering, when you think about processing and moving through the grief and the loss that has been school closures and the pandemic, I'm curious, who are you all going to for support as leaders? Who's helping you either create space for you to actually process those feelings or to ask questions and think about, where do we go from here? What has that looked like for you as leaders?
Oh, well, we have a weekly principals collaborative meeting with all the principals in our county. And sometimes the meeting is, we don't have the answers. Mm-hmm. And it's okay being in the state of, I don't know. As leaders, we're used to being the ones that have the answers. We're the go-to people, and so I tell my staff all the time, if you ask me a question, I'm going to tell you what I know. And if I don't know, we're going to develop a source of where we can get the answer, or we're going to come up with a solution together. So it's that vulnerability and being transparent with your fellow leaders, but also with your staff, letting them know, I'm going through this right with you. And some of the same feelings and fears and unknown that you're having right now, I am also having. But I also keep myself grounded in realizing that there are young people who have been on this earth far less years than we have that need us. And so although I am experiencing this, I kind of put it on the back burner, but I also know that that's my passion. That's what pulls me through, knowing that little person on the other side of the Zoom call, or when I log into the classes, it looks like the students are climbing into the Zoom camera because they want to get that connection. It's just being okay with collaborating with other leaders, saying it's okay that we don't know, but we're all we have right now, and we're going to get through this. And, and we come up with different sayings and different mantras, but I have a fabulous team of vice principals that I rely on. My principal secretary, everyone in the building, I'm completely vulnerable with them. And they're like, how are you coping? I'm like, well, today I'm not. And I have to be very honest. And I'll say, COVID is not going to take me out. It is not going to take me out. And we have to be very real in that space. And how we're feeling, I just have to name it and call it at that moment, and if someone else is bringing anxiety to me, I'll say, let's breathe. I feel the energy that you're bringing. I don't know if I'm going to be able to calm you right now, but what can we do together right now in this moment to help you feel better? What can I say to you? Because I don't have the answer that you want. The answers that you want, I don't have that. I can't give that to you. So it's just being okay with not being okay and not knowing, and realizing that I tell my teachers, I'm a first year principal right now. This is my first year being a principal in COVID. I'm a first year principal of a virtual school, and you're a first year teacher. So although I have years of experience right now, we're all building this while we're trying to make it fly and take off. So it's being okay with not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the leadership team of the school is a source of that kind of comfort that's built in from people sharing the responsibility for something. And I think we have to remind ourselves, my assistant principals and myself, to acknowledge each other as people sometimes, because otherwise we would just keep going. But we are all experiencing this also. I would also just say, I feel very lucky. I had this experience that from the first day New York City public schools were officially remote, I was able to continue working in person as a volunteer leader of an in-person childcare center for the children of New York City's essential workers. And so the group of people, the teachers, teaching assistants, subs, and the other leaders, the cafeteria workers, school safety, everyone who was in that space, I feel like it's such clear, direct, powerful evidence of the way crisis bonds people and brings people together. And the emotional support, even though we didn't often have time to talk about it during the experience because we were busy going, that group continues to provide to each other to this day, even though we don't all work in the same space anymore, is really powerful and resonant. Just the shared experience of going through a crisis with people provides you so much care and support.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
As you think about that transition from, okay, we're open, this is our life and way of working and teaching and learning as we know it, and boom, this is that change. What was that transition like for your communities? Jessica, you mentioned that your community is largely new immigrants and many of your students return to their home countries. So what was that like?
That part of it has kind of been slow, and mostly what we saw is when we were coming back this year. I have a great percentage of kids who are learning completely remotely, many of whom are in other places. Um, we've also, I think this is probably true of everywhere, but New York City especially, we've also lost a lot of kids who've moved to other places, other states, other cities. So our community was really in transition. Throughout this whole process. So I think one of the things that we've tried to focus on is maintaining our community and our values and our routines to the greatest extent we can, because everyone is having such different experiences at home. So I think I echo that kind of sense of loss or grief, because this was the way that we did things. The community was there. And it kind of started to crumble and scatter a little bit. So a lot of emphasis has been put on the things that we can control and the things that we can continue in our routines, to try to keep us together and feeling positive and still feeling together.
And what does that look like in practice when you have students? You mentioned some are, back in their home countries and not even in New York State or in the US. What does that look like?
One of the things that I have emphasized from the beginning of this is that some of our big routines of the day have continued. So one of the things that we do in my school is our first period of every day on all grades is a leadership and movement period, where we use the modules from Move This World. We're also a Leader in Me school, so we do direct teaching around the 7 habits, and that time has always really been sacred to us, and we've maintained that virtually as well. So everybody kind of gets up and starts the day together in a similar way. We've maintained some of our other routines. We share a book of the month around a particular theme every year. And generally what happens is I read to the kids in the auditorium. We talk about it a little bit, and then the teachers reread during leadership movement time. The kids do art projects to reflect on the books, etc. And we've maintained that as well. I do a virtual reading, and teachers share it with kids, and then they do the similar activities. So some of those big things that the kids rely on, we have kept as part of our routine, part of our daily routine, part of our monthly routine, so that it still feels like PS 128 and it still feels like our community, even though we aren't all physically together every day.
That's a great point. I'm curious how you all are continuing to cultivate and inspire community, whether you are in person, hybrid, remote. What does that through line look like, especially when in New York City, we have gone from in person to hybrid to remote to now we're going back to in person. So it is a lot of transitioning back and forth. How do you build in that continuity regardless of the place that you're in?
It was really helpful. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Melinda.
I was going to say that is a really good question. And I think what Jessica said is key, is keeping the normalcy.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you did in the brick and mortar, you can certainly do virtually. And how do you do that? Even if you have the hybrid model, how do you keep it normal? Every other arena has kept it normal. The doctor's office, teletherapy. I cannot tell you how much I enjoy a teletherapy appointment. I feel more valued in a teletherapy appointment than an in-person appointment. So, that adjustment for me was just like that. So knowing that our children are resilient, our families are resilient. We're in the age where digital is the way, except for when you have that divide, so we had to ensure all of our families had devices and hotspots. And so at one point we were text messaging our morning announcements to our families and keeping a music moment going. The same things we did in school, we were doing it virtually. And it's very important, like what Jessica said, if she read the story in school, well, why can't I do it online? And so keeping that going has been very big. We have a learning support center in our school where our some of our teachers can bring their scholars. And I walked in just to say hi, but it's so weird because I'm in person, but they're in class virtually. So I don't want to interrupt their lessons because all of them are in different schedules. And so they want to run and hug and they want to run and touch. We do air hugs. But one of the students said to me, I really enjoy the announcements, so knowing that they still value our mantras, when they go low, we fly high. We say that every day. We're Cardinals and we fly high. So they really value that. But I think what's happening now is we have a stronger community because that parent that's sitting at home hearing that virtual lesson and hearing that mantra and hearing Move This World, they have buy-in collectively and they can tackle challenges that they're experiencing by utilizing the tools that we've presented to the scholars. So now the parents see, when our students have their therapy sessions or speech therapy sessions with the psychologist, with the speech pathologist, the parents are now a part of that. So the community, I believe this side of virtual learning is strengthening us as a community. Although we're not together physically, we are together virtually. And we say that we can do virtually anything together. And so we have our literacy nights, our PTO meetings, our parent chats. We had a night we did a s'mores session and we sent home s'mores and families could build s'mores, make their s'mores together.
That's so fun.
We're still doing the same things, but making sure all of our families have access. So, some of my vice principals, my pupil personnel workers delivers computers to homes where there, isn't transportation, mobile. So whatever it takes is exhausting, but whatever it takes, we want to make everyone feel connected.
I think that having school community that's really centered on tradition and ritual and routine, which is what makes a great school anytime, in my opinion, and it sounds like in both of your experience and opinions too, lent itself to making this transition more as seamless as it could possibly be in these, just extreme circumstances. Because what we had to learn and figure out at the beginning was like Google Classroom, Google Meet, Zoom, these different tools. But what we always said was it's still going to be new bridges. And we need to provide that continuity to each other as the adults in this situation and then make sure that we're providing it to students. And so similar things with starting the morning with certain songs and affirmations, the rituals of our community, they are non-negotiables in the now Zoom classroom.
So you've mentioned ways of engaging parents. I've heard about trying to ensure there's access. The s'more night sounds so fun. How are you bringing families into the classroom? How are you engaging families? Because we're all experiencing, especially those of us as parents, the new role of what it means to be learning at home. What does that look like in terms of practices, programs that you and your team have been implementing?
I think that there just immediately was a barrier removed, whether people all wanted it removed or not, once the classroom was in the living room. And so there were so many parents who reached out to us, especially in the first few months, like, I didn't know how hard teachers had to work. And they just had so much more access and connection to what their children were learning and working on that, like, forget about having a literacy workshop for parents. Like, this was so authentic. You're actually sitting in the same room as your child is trying to figure out what's going on with their character, in the book they're reading. So that depth of connection to the teaching that's been a total game changer. But then I would say we've also had to be really respectful of the enormous stress that this pandemic has put on families and parents who are trying to provide for their children, oftentimes trying to take care of other family members within the home. There are homes full of life as people are working remote or people are out of work and kids are learning remotely. And so while we're trying to engage them, we're also trying to do it in a way that really does not put pressure on them. Like, let us do as much of the lifting as we can. Just make sure your child has a space that they're set up on Zoom at 9 a.m. And we're going to take it from there and let you, take care of yourself also.
But that's also so hard, especially at the elementary age and early elementary age.
It's a partnership.
Right. When, yes, the teacher can do as much as possible, but the teacher still, to your point, Melinda, you're saying, I want to jump into the Zoom and hug the child and connect to the child. It's like there's only so much connection that can happen. And there is a responsibility that falls on the family member that's physically present.
Right. And I think that was, for us, evidenced by how many parents did choose to have their children come back to school in person when that became available. And over 2/3 of our students are back on a full-time basis. And that has to do, I think, both with parents' trust in us in this stressful time, which was built over, years of relationship building, including the time that we were fully remote, but also speaks to the challenge of the circumstance for families and parents.
So let's talk about that for a second. Melinda, your community is entirely remote, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Kevin, your school is, you said, 2/3 full-time. And Jessica, you're hybrid?
I'm hybrid. Yeah. About a little more than a fourth of my kids come in to the building sometimes.
Great. So kind of across the spectrum of engagement, which makes managing teaching and learning and running a school, I can imagine, just next to impossible, given that it's not like, okay, I'm running a remote school or I'm running a hybrid school. It's like, well, today this is what's happening and next week this is what's happening, and all of the constant changes. Mm-hmm. How are you managing the inevitable disappointment that is being lived from parents and families for whom, like, it's not ideal? Disappointment from teachers for whom this is not ideal. Disappointment for yourself. Like, what are the ways that you're managing disappointment during what has been a really just disappointing 9 months?
I can share. I think one of the biggest disappointments for me is, as a school that serves many new immigrant families, I see it as part of our responsibility to help the kids and the families to acclimate to New York City, to acclimate to the United States, to use the city. So I have a tremendous number of trips and activities that I bring in. I bring in somebody to bake bread with the kids. They hatch eggs into chicks. They do all of these kind of different activities. And I think on top of giving them an experience of the city, it also, because kids are coming from all different language backgrounds, it gives them some common kid-centered stuff to talk about and to gain vocabulary around. And it's been a great disappointment to me to not have that, to lose a lot of my residencies that I have. I have kids build things with the Center for Architecture and with LEAP and with all kinds of different organizations, and I've had to let a lot of that go, both because it can't be done virtually, but also for budgetary reasons this year. So that has really been a great disappointment to me. And, earlier this week, I had my staff on a meeting, and one of the things that I had us reflect upon was, beside this disappointment, what are some of the things that we can see that we've learned and that kids have learned through this experience that we might not otherwise know? So, we talked about that a little bit, how some things are mitigated a little bit, how we said that our kids have been learning to help siblings in ways that they hadn't before. Some of my older students are helping their little siblings online. And, they're helping to care for baby siblings while they're home, and they're organizing their days differently. And the teachers have been really impressed with how the kids are managing and maturing in a time sensitive way through all this. And I also think that my teachers have grown in being able to liaise with parents and families in a different way, and to understand what it looks like inside these kids' houses in a way that they didn't maybe know before, and to have some of the culture of new immigrant families brought to life a little bit more for the teachers. I think although we're separated, there's somewhat more of a connection when you have the intimacy of being in someone's home and seeing what kinds of interruptions the kids have and who their family members are, and the babies that come up to say hello on the screen, and all of those things. Yeah. I think we've tried to mitigate with some of that.
And I would agree. I think naming the disappointment and just being very transparent about what it is, but then also naming all of the advantages that virtual learning has brought to us. I tell my staff, I say, listen, you have another area, that skill that you can add to your resume that you would not have done otherwise. you're now using digital tools that you would have probably never even thought about using, or saying, I'm scared of that. So we've been able to push past some fears.
Mm-hmm.
We have teachers who are utilizing tools and have become very proficient in modeling strategies for other teachers. And so our students are now, when I watch the little kindergartners mute and watch the pre-K scholars, and then they, open up this tool and the 4-year-olds. And so it is really a beautiful thing to see something that, and in the beginning, I had a lot of fear, about, oh my goodness, how am I going to manage and what is this going to look like? But to actually see it happen before my eyes, I have to tell my staff all the time, I say, listen, I have to applaud you all. You are teaching, and the energy that you bring each and every day is phenomenal. This is something that we made happen together, and we did not know that we were going to get to this point where we're now comfortable with digital and virtual learning. We're now comfortable with the tools. So I think it's naming the disappointment, but celebrating those successes to say, look at where you are now. When I log into your class, this is what I see. You may not see, you may see yourself fumbling through and trying to move through this PowerPoint to this, but what I see, and when I look at their faces, I see engagement. I see scholars who are looking to connect with you. I see family members sitting close by, making sure their child is logged in. So I see parental involvement. I see an increase in that, and so I think that is the key. I see more teachers attending our evening parent events because they could be at home with their families, but logged into a virtual event. So I that's what I help to overcome the disappointment. It is disappointing not to have field trips. It is disappointing that at one point we were moving into phase 2. So we were going to have our special populations return, but days before we decided to pause because of the shift in our state. And so those students who went to get their lunch back and get their new clothes for school, who thought they were coming on Monday, found out on Thursday they were not coming back. So that's another layer of disappointment. Parents who were ready, I'm going to drop them off, I'm ready for them to come back, had to find out on a Thursday that they were not. So we had to, continue to just name the disappointment, name the positives of what we were doing, address the negatives of it. Yes, this is disappointing, but we're going to get through this together. And we utilize our mental health professionals. I have a full-time psychologist and a counselor, so they open themselves and make themselves available for drop-in sessions. So the availability piece is huge. But sometimes, we have to get over that resistance. Well, I don't need to talk to anybody. I'm okay. Well, let's talk about, this is a collaborative conversation, and so helping that fear of that as well. But it is very disappointing. And I'm just very transparent. When I'm upset about something, I tell my staff. When something doesn't make sense to me, I say it. But I also say we're going to get through this together, and we're going to come up with some real solutions. And I say, look at how far in March, look at how we were feeling. Look at the fears and the anxiety. But look at the leaps and bounds that we've accomplished from March to now. It's tremendous. It is phenomenal to see. I just can't even put it into words how I feel when I log into a class and I just see the activities and the lessons and the engagement and the things still happening.
Let's talk about those successes, because yes, this year has been disappointing. It's been tragic, but there has been innovation. There have been beautiful moments of inspiration and leadership and teaching and learning happening. What are some of the successes that you've seen in 2020? That you're most proud of?
I definitely think that maintaining and even building and strengthening community in a time that you would think would have isolated everybody feels like a success. And while my preference is to do that in person, and I'm so grateful that so many of our kids and staff are able to be back, I do see that with educators who believe that it can be done in the remote setting, then it can be done in the remote setting. And human emotions can be talked about and dealt with and acknowledged and supported, and love can be shared in a Zoom classroom. And if we do that, and if we prioritize that, community can be maintained and built and strengthened. And I've seen that happen, and that feels like a success in a time where, yes, there are just so many challenges.
Sure.
I definitely agree with Kevin, and I think it's the shift in the mindset too. It's you maybe have a veteran teacher who's been teaching for years, but now has a different mindset around technology. So that success right there is just phenomenal. When we come back one day, when we're back in normal classroom, the tools that I'm going to see with technology, which were probably foreign before, I'm going to see with ease, no problem. You know, we all came together. You know, every family has a device, a hotspot if needed. So families are now learning how to use the technology. We're holding parent tech talk sessions, so parents are learning Nearpod, digital Dropbox, and Clever and Imagine Learning. They're learning all of the tools, which otherwise maybe would have not catapulted the way that it is. We are passing out materials, so teachers are getting creative with sending home materials to make crafts. So our kindergarten classes, right before we went out on Thanksgiving, they all made pie. And so you can see them in the Zoom holding up their pieces of pie, but it's, you know, we cut out all the construction pieces and sent them home. And so they followed and did a craft at home. So whereas before, you know, maybe mom was at work and she didn't get a chance to do that craft with her child, but now they're working together, putting things together, you know, we're building things together. And so I think it's the togetherness. I think that we are stronger. I think that we've become closer as being transparent with how we're feeling, you know, with cases popping up in the county, cases popping up, you know, it's having fear together, but knowing we can get through this together if everyone is on the same page. You know, my building services team, they're on the same page. You know, my food services team, they're serving food every single day. And now in the morning, they're outside serving food for an hour and then serving at lunchtime. And so those are the connections that we see. So I just think overall where we are now and where we were in March, it is a great accomplishment. And any school leader, any teacher should be very happy that they have the ability now to connect with their students in a way that they did not before. And you have to challenge yourself. We talked about knowing your roster. You can see them every day walking to class. You can see when someone's having a bad day. You can look and just watch and observe. But here you have to see them in the box. So your senses are a little more keen now to what's happening with your scholars. You're a little more in touch with their social emotional learning, the affective domain. You know, you have to be. So, you know, when I log in and teacher sees, you know, a student go back and flip and come back they call them and I was on one day and I called a student, his parents own a nail salon. So he ran off and did something and I called his name. He came back, oh, I'm here. I just had to go do something. So they're responding, you know. So the responsiveness, I think, is a success, you know, and then parents are now looking for information for us and responding and being involved. And, you know, we are also forced with our ESOL population to make sure we are making our documents and everything we send out accessible to every family. So that's pushing us. That's pushing us to make sure that we think about every student that we're reaching and we're connecting to every family. So connectivity is a huge success as well.
I've definitely been worried about instruction in this blended and remote environment. But I have to say, I was extremely impressed. I went to a 5th grade publishing party virtually last week, and I was really amazed with the kids' writing, as well as the structure. I want to do our publishing parties virtually all the time, because I think anybody who, you know, works in elementary school knows that when you have publishing parties, one kid is reading and other kids are going, oh, there's a bee, you know, is it going to rain? I'm touching my foot. So when everybody's in the Zoom gallery, you know, there's just this real attention on the speaker and really highlighting of the work that doesn't necessarily get to happen. And a great number of adults in the school community were also able to attend the reading. So all of the 5th grade team who teach the various subjects, and all of the kids were together, and I was there and my assistant principal was there. And it was just a really, really nice event. And I was very impressed with the kids' work. So that gave me a bright spot around instruction, because I see that it is happening and kids are growing. And the platform for sharing was just great.
So as we look to the second half of the school year, which is right around the corner and the top of 2021, what worries you? What keeps you up at night? What concerns do you have either for your students, families, your staff? Melinda?
I would definitely say, you know, not every student comes from a home environment that is nurturing, attentive, and supportive. And so when they're in our presence for majority of the day, 5 days out of the week, we get an opportunity to be the first responder, you know, to observe, to support, to just notice when something isn't right and follow whatever protocols we have in place to provide that support. Now it's you see a box, you know, you have to use your spidey senses, whatever, you know, to kind of see if something isn't quite right. But other than that, there isn't anything else much that I believe we can ensure and see that face the next day and know that, you know, is everything okay? So that piece worries me about the ones who are at home. You know, school is a safe haven. School is bright, it's colorful, there's music. You get to walk down the hall, have lunch, go to recess, get a fist bump. You know, you get to do whatever, brain breaks, move this. You get to do all of that. And we could do that virtually, but it's nothing like being in that environment that is your place. You know, I'm going back to Chuck E. Cheese, where a kid can be a kid, but it's where a student can be, a student. You know, you can come to school if you want to skip down the hallway, you can. If you want to be the funniest one at the cafeteria table, you can. If you want to run at recess as fast as you can and jump off the slides, you can. So those are connections and those social emotional learning pieces and friendship, you know, is no longer there. And so that's where my heart, you know, kind of at night is just like, wow. And I know some very, you know, different stories of the ones who would end up in my office every day for attention, you know, for a hug and for, what are you doing? And, you know, and you just, that conversation piece, you know, going back and forth and having a conversation with a student and just learning, what did you do over the weekend? You know, we have mentoring groups that we had in place. We had safety patrols, school ambassadors who gave tours in the building, you know, clubs. And so we're still trying to get those going, but you have teachers who are just burnt out. How can I lead a club if I did Zoom all day and I have a family at home? So that's what how do we make sure that they're truly okay and that we are doing everything possible to ensure that they're safe and they're cared for and they're nurtured outside of school hours?
Yeah, I feel like you captured a lot of my feelings, Melinda. I think when I feel worry, it is about kids slipping through the cracks, and it mostly has to do with students who are fully remote. And there's the idea of their safety and them not having a different place outside of the home. I think there's also just the isolation that this has created for a lot of not just children, but also adults who are totally confined to their, you know, their own home, their own space. And then while I am proud of a lot of the instructional things we've been able to do remotely, there is no way to me that there is the same academic impact of a year spent fully remote as a year spent in the classroom with a teacher. So I'm worried about students who will slip through the cracks in terms of their safety, in terms of their emotional well-being and the isolation and the impact of that isolation, and then in terms of their academic progress. But I try not to focus on the worries and more about what can we do about those things. So even in this conversation, I'm going to bring myself back there because it's just, we got to stay focused on what can we do, because this is the circumstance that we're running schools in this year.
Well, and that's a great...
Kevin, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Melinda.
I was going to say, when Kevin said isolation, he also brought another worry that I have. You know, I have some staff members who have family elsewhere, and so they're here. And you know, that interaction, they used to come and talk with colleagues in the teacher's lounge and enjoy one another. And, you know, we talk to children all day, so we need that adult social aspect, and some just don't have it. So I worry about that. I worry about their home and how they're feeling in their own isolated space. And that's something that we talk about self-care. We talk about disconnecting, but there are some staff, when they disconnect, there's no one at home to connect to. So I do worry and think about that also.
Well, in the spirit of managing the worry and managing the fear, what gives you a sense of hope or optimism as you look to 2021 and the second half of this school year? Jessica?
Well, I can share. So I have been operating on a 3 cohort model. So my kids have been coming into the building 2 days or 1 day a week. And given the numbers of kids that I have, I will be reopening on Monday with a 2 cohort model. So I am looking forward to having kids who want to be in the building, who are able to come in a little more. And, there's now a push in New York City to have kids come in 5 days a week. I do have my children with special needs coming in 5 days a week already, but I'm hoping to expand that to some of my lower grades. I think I might be able to get K and maybe 1 in 5 days a week. When we talk about worry, there is nothing like a school full of brand new to the country English language learning 5-year-olds and writing virtually. So, that's one of my big worries. So I'm looking forward to having little kids talking with each other all day long and sitting at centers and using a pencil to write on paper and having a teacher there to look at it. So I'm looking forward to increasing the amount of time that kids can be in. And, if we have to close again, we'll close again, but we'll get through this, and at some point we will be back in the building. And things are looking bright, I think, on the horizon. Although we may be entering a darker time right now, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm looking forward to that.
Jessica, as you're talking about having your K and first graders back in the building, here in the studio, Kevin's doing a little move this world applause. He's so excited. Kevin, tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing to advocate for how schools can open safely, how students and staff can be together, learning, working together safely in the pandemic.
So I definitely have been outspoken about this since a time where it was not a popular idea within New York City to have teachers and kids come back. And a lot of that was informed by the fact that when all schools closed down, I never was at home without kids. I immediately was in a New York City public school building in my neighborhood where the children of New York City's essential workers continued to come to school. They were in small socially distanced cohorts. They wore masks all day. They stayed in the same classroom with the same group of kids and the same adults for a full 12-hour day that we were all there together. And in those little socially distanced cohorts, we were able to create community and joy and support each other in this extremely stressful moment for our city, for our country, for our world. And we never had a positive COVID case within that school community. So I just knew that we had done it there, and I believed that we could do it once I heard about the possibility of reopening in September. So I just always approached it that way. How can we get kids in, following all these safety protocols, but then be able to provide them everything we know is great about in-person instruction? I totally respect people's fears and concerns about it, but from that personal firsthand experience, I did have comfort with it. So I definitely was not afraid to raise my voice around that, because I know so many people, without having had that perspective from being in person with kids during the pandemic, lived more in a space of everything that could go wrong. And of course, there are so many things that, that potentially could, but I do believe that the benefits for kids, for teachers, for the community, for those who choose it, mean that in-person learning has to be available to children.
Well, and I so appreciated when you started, I guess, even early on in the pandemic, sharing your perspective and your experience, because if we haven't seen it, we can't even begin to imagine that it's possible.
Right.
And when so much of what we're consuming is fear-based, because this is for our generation's first lived pandemic, and we don't have science available to us, it's easy to kind of operate from a place of fear. So you sharing your experience opening a school safely for those who choose to attend was so inspiring for me to know that it's possible. And as a mother of a 3-year-old for whom her school pre-pandemic was not able to reopen, and then trying to find a new learning community for her, watching her and her peers all be so good about wearing their masks.
Yes.
And she never complains to me about wearing her mask. She never asks for a mask break. She puts it on everywhere we go. She just knows this is part of what it means to be in the world right now. And I admire those leaders who have that bravery and conviction in doing this safely, because I do think for many communities, this is a really important safe space that we can provide.
Thank you for saying that. And I would just quickly add that it was really the resilience of the children, like you said, that showed me that it was possible, because those kids were there for 12 hours every day, like you said, wearing masks, meeting new kids because they were from all different schools. And it was their resilience, that lit the way for the rest of us doing this for the rest of New York City's kids who have returned to buildings this fall.
My sister is actually, I mentioned this early on in the Sarahcast, she's an administrator of an early childhood independent school in Virginia, and her school has been open the entire school year. And she always says, kids, to your point, are resilient. They wear their masks. They follow the protocol. They do what is expected. It's just us as adults who are making all the decisions that have to take all of this information in this new uncharted territory and try to do what's best for kids and teachers and families. So I know. Go ahead, Jessica.
Sorry, the kids adapt in ways that we just don't. Time is different for them. They haven't been alive that long. And I think, the way that they just go into whatever this new thing is just amazing. I have a 6-year-old of my own, and he told me the other day that one of the things he likes about the pandemic is wearing a mask. And I asked him why. He said, because I'm used to it. So it's just become something that he somehow thinks he likes because something he's been doing every day. So, we need to put our own adult resistance to change aside and just think about, what they're seeing as being great. And, I shared this with this community, with the Move This World community at the beginning of the year, but I was amazed with how well my kindergartners did coming in for the very first time to school. Kindergarten actually went way better this year in tiny pods than it does. I didn't have criers. I didn't have any runners. I didn't have anybody hanging on to their mom and telling me they weren't coming. It was calmer and quieter, and they wear their masks and they sit in their seats, and they adapted really, really well. So, it's kids can do this, even if we think we can't.
Dr. Kathy Hirsch-Pasek, who was on an earlier episode of the Sarahcast, one of my favorite things that she said to me when I became a first-time mother was, Sarah, you can't mess this up. Kids are built to last. And I go back to that daily. It's just this idea that kids are built to last, and we have to relieve some of the pressure that we put on ourselves for every decision to be perfect, and just always try to do what's best for them. So I feel like I could talk to the three of you forever, and people are making kind of like side eyes at me, like this conversation's going on, and there's so much that we all have to learn from you. So I think there's even follow-up discussions to be had around the ways that your schools will look in 2021, having more students back in the building, moving to a 2-cohort model, or in your case, Melinda, continuing to be remote. What's the impact? What is this looking like now that we have a little bit more time and a little bit more data? What are we seeing? And as we begin to plan for the 2021-22 school year, still with so much unknown and uncertainty, what have we learned that we can take with us? So as we close out this conversation, I'd like to end with a practice of gratitude. And so as we breathe and kind of soak in that gratitude, I'd like to invite each of you to share either a word or phrase or a sentence of gratitude that you are feeling right now in this moment. And we can do this first with Jessica, and then we'll move to Melinda and then Kevin.
I was hoping I had a minute to think.
That's a word that captures what we're grateful for.
Just like something that you are grateful for, word, phrase, a sentence or two. So if it's like, the ability to have students in your building, or what are you feeling grateful for right now?
As a school leader, I'm definitely grateful that everyone is really bringing their best. Everyone understands that everyone else is struggling, and most people really are doing everything they can to do the best job they can and to make everyone else's lives as easy as they can.
So let's take one deep breath for that gratitude. Breath in and out. Melinda.
Gratitude was our core value for November. And so I want to say that I am very grateful to have the opportunity to serve in a profession where I know that there are tons of school leaders around the world who are doing better than I am, who I can look up to and learn from and grow from. And I appreciate this experience with Jessica and Kevin, hearing how they are, I'm not more than one sentence, but I'm sorry. They're in person and we can do it. I have to go back to my staff meeting tomorrow. I'm like, we can do it. So definitely just hearing your passion, Kevin, for the in-person and Jessica hearing about your kindergarten. I think I was on that call. I went back and I said, we can do this. So definitely I'm grateful for learning from and vibing from, my daughter says vibing all the time, from your energy and your spirit.
Thank you, Melinda. So let's take a deep breath in for that. And exhale.
I am definitely grateful for living and working in a place of possibility. I'm grateful for the power of community and communities, and I'm grateful for the resilience of children.
Let's take a deep breath in for that. And out. Kevin, Jessica, and Melinda, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your perspectives in this last episode of the first season of the Sarahcast. We're so grateful for your time and sharing all that you've seen in your communities over the last 9 months of this pandemic. We hope that the rest of your school year, you and your families and your communities stay safe and healthy and joyful whenever possible. Thank you for joining us for Season 1 of the Sarahcast, Conversations in Social Emotional Learning. As I look back on all of the conversations we've had in this first season, from the creative arts to the importance of play to SEL policy and assessments, I'm reminded that this work is more critical than ever before. From trying to survive and move through a global pandemic, to navigating a contentious election cycle, to experiencing racial unrest and bracing for environmental disasters, 2020 is a lot to process. But our strength lies within our greatest challenges. Each time we face something difficult, it's an opportunity to learn, to reflect, to grow stronger. How do we react? Who do we turn to? What decisions do we make? The conversations I've had this season with scientists like Dr. Kathy Hirsch-Pasek and Dina Nunziato, to researchers like Dr. Nick Yoder and Dr. Clark McGowan, to educators like Matthew Portell and the team at Durham Public Schools, these conversations remind me that the work is never over. We don't arrive one day at social emotional wellness. We constantly grow and practice. Not only that, but we're never alone. When we connect with others, we deepen our understanding of ourselves. I'd love to hear what you learned from Season 1 of the Sarahcast. You can let us know on Instagram at move_thisworld. Please also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts to help others find the Sarahcast as well. We'll be back for Season 2 in the new year, so make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss our brand new season. The Sarahcast, Conversations in Social Emotional Learning, is produced by the Move This World Audio Network. Jessica Altunian is our producer, Aaron Altunian is our editor, and Rachel Altunian composed our theme music. And I'm your host, Sarah Lahane. Move This World supports social emotional learning for students, their families, and their school communities through evidence-based curricula rooted in creative expression and movement. You can find additional resources to support SEL in your district, school, classroom, or home on our website, movethisworld.com. Together, we can create a world where everyone belongs. I'll see you next time.